I'd like to ask how the Morrison government can justify spending $600 million on a Hunter Valley coal-fired power station when all the global and local scientific and economic advice is telling us otherwise. Surely this is just a simple grab for votes in the Hunter Valley by-election? And when are we going to see some real long-term solutions rather than just short-term political stunts?
Zoe Whitton.
It's a question, like many of the things we address here, which is absolutely a question of the moment, certainly has occupied much of our week. I come from the private sector angle, so a lot of the time when I'm speaking on this, that's the place we come from in a really strong way. And one of the interesting things about this, of course, is that the private sector investors and companies in Australia have been moving away from these types of investments. And of course, that's at contrast with this recent investment. But what I do have to say is that the government is making that investment in an entirely different context to the way that a private investor is thinking about it. A private investor is saying, look, do I think this asset is still going to allow me to be in the place I want to be on a transition nationally? Do I think that in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, this thing is still going to be running and is not going to be stranded? But a government is making a decision in a very different place. And so what I would say about it is two things. And the first is that a lot of the other investments we've seen recently in firming capacity, and some of them have been supported by the government, have had this great feature about them, which is that they actually have a transition pathway in place. So the ability to switch on to hydrogen, the ability more broadly to get CCS coverage online, basically the ability to not build the one-bedroom house, but build the multiple-bedroom house because you know you might have kids in the future and you want it to be future-proof. And what we're starting to see with most of these assets is that they are, when they're being put together, they are future-proof. So that's certainly the direction that we need to go with these types of investments.
And we need to do that.
I think what I'm saying is most of the investments we're seeing are in that mode, and we'd want to see this go in the same direction, certainly if it's going to play a role over time in the Australian power sector. And we're doing that in the context of, and I think there's been so much focus on this power station and whether it's good or bad. I think the real question is, how does it fit into the plan? So we have a lot of different pathways that we can take to transition in Australia, and we have to go on transition as a journey because we're not Europe and we don't want to be Europe. And so we need to go from where we are with what we have. And the question is, how does an investment like this fit in to a pathway that will keep us competitive, that will keep our relationships with our trade partners, and will allow us to really move through that transition in a very focused way and take advantage of it and really capture the opportunities that are available for the Australian economy in that global context.
Luke McGregor, does it make sense to you?
Not at all. No, we're talking about the gas power station in the Hunter. Is it how many megawatts was it? It's going to be.
Is
that the 660 megawatts?
So
yeah.
So this is because the Liddell coal-fired power station is shutting down, right?
Yep.
So the independent government bodies, what is it, the Energy Security Board and the Australian Market Operator said that the shortfall was 154
something like that. Yep.
megawatts, and then the Liberal government said it's actually 1,000. I don't know if the modelling's been released for that, but and then they said, okay, well it's not 1,000, but it is. If you want energy security, then you want to have 1,000. My issue with it is that, like, when I was researching this, I thought, OK, let's just look at it from the point of view of it doesn't matter if the whole world sits on fire and climate change is a hoax, but it still doesn't make any sense because Australia already produces more gas than it uses. We're the largest exporter of gas next to Qatar. I think we fight it out. It's like 77, I can't even remember what, but I don't even know what the 77 million something or others of liquid natural gas. Petajoules. We're the largest exporter of gas, but it hasn't resulted in lower gas prices for Australia. The gas production in Australia has tripled in the last 6 years, but manufacturing jobs have gone down. We basically, in economics, you would think that if you introduce more supply of something to the economy, that the price would go down. But in gas, it doesn't. We already produce more gas than we use, but the price hasn't gone down. In fact, the ACCC has said over the last 2 years, Australian domestic consumers, domestic users are paying more for domestic gas than overseas markets are. And the reason is they have these long-term contracts and they have gas prices that are stuck. And when the price internationally goes lower in Australia, that doesn't get transferred to the domestic market. And the head of the ACCC said, when asked why is that happening, they said they haven't heard a good reason from gas producers as to why that happens. I'm assuming it's because they can do it, because they're not being stopped from doing it. So you introduce more gas. I just don't understand the shortfall's not there. And even the organisations, the Australian Market Energy Operator, the Australian Energy Security Board, they both said this is an unnecessary project. The existing and probable projects are already more than covering this gap. So I just can't make any sense as to why. It's possibly because, what is it, the National COVID Commission, what's it called?
Recovery.
What's it called?
Yeah.
The NCCC something?
The NCCC.
You're telling the story. I'm just turning the pages.
The National COVID...
Led by Nev Power. Is that what you're talking about?
Nev Power.
From Fortescue.
Fortescue. Nev Power is a board member for Strike Energy, who are an oil and gas exploration company. And then the other guy who's advising the task force is a guy called Andrew Liveris.
Yeah, he was on this show a few weeks ago.
Yeah, he's a deputy chairman of the world's biggest oil and gas consultancy firm. And you'll never guess what these two gas executives thought would be good for the economy. More gas. Like it's not even taking the piss at this point. It just doesn't. I'm sorry for spitting. I got a retainer in it. It makes me spit. Anyway. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense if you say climate change is a hoax and you set the whole world on fire. It still doesn't make any sense.
Barnaby, does it make sense?
Look, thank you for that. You can take a breath now. Here we go, Twitters, Twitter haters, get ready for this. I agree with Luke. We shouldn't be building a gas-fired power station. We should be building a coal-fired power station. And the reason for that is this gas-fired power station is yet another subsidy to the renewable industry. The only reason we're building it is because of this sort of random movement of prices. In the last week, prices have spiked over 100 times. This means your regular price of power, around about $45, $50 a megawatt, has been going up to $5,000 a megawatt because sometimes there's more power than we know what to do with, and other times there's none at all.
Just on that.
Hang on, mate. You went for about a week and a half.
I know.
So what we've got to try and do here is try and make sure we bring some rational process to it. So to try and make renewables rational, we're spending in excess of $600 million to put a gas-fired power plant in the middle of the coalfields. Now, I would put a coal-fired power plant because right as we speak, we've got hundreds being built overseas, new coal-fired power plants. We should be making them more efficient. We should be making them cleaner. But if you want your biggest export in this state, last year, record exports of coal, we should be making sure that we send with our product that you need the money for your health, for your education, for your services. We should be sending the technology with it. That's what I'd be doing.
I promise to be shorter this time.
Well, you've got no choice. We'll run out of time.
I apologise. One of the problems with, and I'm not talking about the environment here, is as the world moves away, even though Australia doesn't have emission targets, the rest of the world does. And so if we want to become a big exporter of, say, hydrogen, at the moment the plan is to separate the hydrogen using coal and gas power. The problem is no one wants to buy it if it's even the...
They are buying it, mate.
No,
there's record sales of it.
No, but what's the name? What's the guy's name? Alan Finkel?
Alan Finkel, that's
former
his name.
chief scientist.
So he said, no one's going to buy it. There was a quote from him. He said, no one's going to buy clean coal if it's made with fossil fuels.
If you go out over Newcastle Harbour, you'll see a whole heap of people who want to buy it. If you go out over Gladstone, you'll see a whole heap of people who want to buy it.
I'm talking about
if you go to
international
Mackay,
markets, though.
But, this is the reality. We've got to be adults. These people are buying the product because they use it.
Are you talking about
and it doesn't matter what...
consumers?
No, I'm talking about international.
But that's the problem is as international bodies. Again, I'm not against it. I'm just talking about the economics of it. As international bodies put carbon targets that we don't have, they won't buy it.
I'll stop buying it, but they are buying it now. And
Let me bring in Gav D'Souza.
it's vital for our terms of trade that we sell to the world what they want because we haven't got other products.
Luke, Barnaby, I'm just going to ask you to sit still for a moment. We're going to introduce Gav D'Souza into this conversation.
Sorry.
The International Energy Agency is saying that we've actually got to bring an end to investment in fossil fuels. We're talking about gas or coal here, if we're listening to Barnaby's advice. Does it stack up?
Yeah, look, I hate to be a nerdy economist on us, but we know that there is a really efficient way of trying to emphasise and invest our resources into more renewable energy, and that's through pricing carbon. Now, I know that that's been a bit of an issue in Australian domestic policy.
It's brought down Prime Ministers.
it's brought down governments, but it is the most efficient way that we can think of to be able to transition our economy into a more renewable one is to put a price on carbon.
Also, that
Can
bond
I
you just
come?
mentioned.
Can I?
Let Tony Burke answer that one.
Sorry, that bond you just mentioned said solar is now the cheapest form of power.
It's not. That's rubbish.
Zoe,
They said it. Well,
It's rubbish.
Team, can
It's
I
like
come in for a minute?
a
Because
car
I
that's
feel that
going
you could
downhill.
probably have this conversation for a while. I think the point about the IEA is a good one, and it's worth just lifting our gaze a bit, because this isn't a question about what we're exporting now, and we are an export superpower, and that's just been fantastic for us economically. The question, and it's really raised by this IEA report, is what are we going to be an export superpower in the future, and what is the plan that allows us to get there? So at the moment, we've got some fantastic policy pillars that are in place that have, for example, allowed us in a number of agencies to invest in technologies as they develop, and hydrogen is one of those. And we're doing some fantastic stuff with hydrogen at the moment. And in the IEA scenario that's just been put out, hydrogen is the big thing that comes down to take up where gas rolls off. So we want to be there, and we want to be there in a really big way. And the question is, what else do we want to be a major exporter of, and how are we going to remain the lucky country? Because we can be lucky on this if we allow ourselves to be. We've just got to be in the game. There are a couple of reports published in the last few weeks that basically said, look, these are the stack of minerals that you're going to need to do this decarbonisation conversation globally, and we're going to need an organisation for their coordination of mineral resources, not for petroleum resources, because they're concentrated in a number of countries, and it turns out Australia is one of those for most of the slate. We are incredibly favoured on this transition, and we have all the national advantages we need. What we need to do is to be leaning into a plan that allows us to say, we've got these exports now, how do we shift them, and where do we need to go so that we can be as prosperous in the future as we are today?
Tony Burke, do you support this proposed gas plant in the Upper Hunter?
Oh, we don't think it should be taxpayer money. Like there will be gas plants that are used for firming, but if the private sector's not willing to do it, you shouldn't be putting public money into it. The other thing that I would say, though, as well,
Joel Fitzgibbon's backing the government's plan on this, isn't
I beg your pardon?
Joel Fitzgibbon is supporting the government's plan on this.
You always get in different parties backbenchers who, within their own electorate will take a different position. Barnaby's made a career of it.
Backbencher. Wow.
Oh, you've made a career of it.
Oh, man.
In fact, you kept doing it from the front bench.
I did it. I just remember it.
But the other thing that I think we need to also consider with this, the timing with the by-election. There's also a political game going on here, and I wouldn't be surprised when you've got so many people saying it just doesn't stack up financially, that this is an announcement that will never be delivered. You go back 3 years ago, we had all this conversation with the government about the Collinsville power station, and we were told there was going to be this new coal-fired power station. 3 years on, never happened. And we've got a different one just before a by-election. We're now talking about a gas plant. There is a habit of the game of announcement for things that never get delivered from the government, and I would not be surprised if this is part of it.
Well, there you heard it, ladies and gentlemen. The Labor Party do not support a power plant in the Hunter Valley, so bear that in mind when you go to vote this weekend. And I think that the reason that the private sector are hesitant is because of this arbitrary nature of the government's interference. We have invested billions and billions and billions of subsidies into the renewable sector, whether it's renewable energy credits, whether it's price purchasing agreements, whether it's deemed rate of return on infrastructure.
Is that true? Is that really the reason why the private sector is cautious about investment?
Therefore, you have places
saying the exact opposite
therefore you
at the
have
moment.
places where you have, and I've been to where coal-fired power plants say we have to turn it right up because there's no power, turn it right down,
Barnaby,
turn it
you're
right up,
gish
turn it right down.
galloping.
And of course, this is an illogical way for any business to work. And then they say, well, if you can graft the system by going to renewables, well, that's where we'll go.
Funny, but everything you just said was not true. Like,
Well, which part?
That's the problem, though, is you
What
can't...
part? What part's not true?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
is
just mention the part that's not true.
okay.
Was the words.
Okay, so it's called a gish gallop. So basically, you say a bunch of stuff over after one thing after the other and after the other. And
No, but which part's not true?
And then it's on the other person who's debating you to have to say, okay, I'll tear it all apart. But
This Aristotelian rhetoric, but which part is not true?
okay, well, let's look at the private sector saying that. We'll just pick one point. We'll say the reason the private sector isn't doing this is because of blah. The only
Well, what's the
reason
blah bit?
Well, the only
Amy, can I comment on why the private sector's not doing
We're
this?
going to have to wrap this
you've
bit
got
of
to
the
be less
conversation
theoretical,
up.
more
So
practical,
very
more
briefly, if we
real.
can, Zoe, just a final thought.
Absolutely. So I would say, going back to this point that I've made before, which is that when you're an investor, your number one stakeholder is reality. You're not allowed to make decisions that are outside of that scope, right? Because it will bite you and it will bite you hard. So the movements that we are seeing at the moment, and we're seeing money pouring into batteries and renewables, are about that that view that they have about, which is outlined in this IEA report, that the system's moving quite quickly and you want to be on the front foot. And that's the public investment space that we can see. What has really bowled us away, particularly in the last 6 months, is just the amount of private money that's moving, because we can see all the Australian super funds making net zero targets. We can see them all trying to figure out how to get there. But behind the scenes, for example, the private equity guys are right in there, and that tells you that they have decided this is time to make money. We're on this transition and we want to take advantage of it.